So in the last lecture, you learned how to use references to relate documents. In this lecture, we're going to look at another technique that is embedding documents. So if you want to code along with me, download this file I have attached to this lecture. That's embedding.js. So here we have this author schema, exactly like what we had in the last lecture. So 3 properties: name, bio, and website. We have this author model. Below that, we have the course model. Now here we don't have the author property, and that's what we're going to add in this lecture. So we add the author property. Now in the last lecture, we set author to an object ID. So let's take a look. Here's our course model from the last lecture. Look, here's the author property. We set the type of this property to an object ID and referenced the author collection. In this lecture, we're going to embed an author document directly inside of a course document. So we set the type of this property to author schema that is defined here. Okay, that's the only change we need to make. So now let's take a look at the create course function. We take a course name and an author, initialize the course, and save it, exactly like before. So down the bottom of this file, we have a call to this function to create a new course with this author. So before going any further, let's open up MongoDB Compass and delete this database. We want to start on a clean canvas to make sure we're on the same page. All right, beautiful. Now in the terminal, let's run node embedding.js. So here's our new course document. You can see author is an object with 2 properties, ID and name. So this is an embedded or a sub-document. These sub-documents are like normal documents. So most features that are available on normal documents are also available in sub-documents. For example, we can implement validation here. We can enforce that author.name should be required. However, these sub-documents cannot be saved on their own. They can only be saved in the context of their parent. So let's say I want to change the name of this author. Here's the course ID. Let's copy that. Here I'm going to create a new function. Async function, update author. We give it the course ID. So here, first we need to find a course with the given ID. So we call course that find by ID, pass this course ID. Now await the result and get this course object. Okay. Now we modify the author. So course.author.name, we set this to Mosh Hamedani. And now we can call course.save. So we don't have course.author.save. That does not exist. Okay. So let's go ahead and run this function. Update author. And here's my course ID. Okay. Now back in the terminal, let's run node embedding.js. Our document is updated. So let's take a look at Compass. Refresh here. This is our playground. Beautiful. Courses collection. Here's our course document, the author object, and you can see the name property is updated. We can also update a sub-document directly. So instead of querying it first, we can update it directly in the database. So here I'm going to modify this code and replace find by ID with update. Here as the first argument, we pass a query object. We're looking for a course with this ID, course ID, okay? And the second argument is our update object. So here we use the set operator that you have seen before. We set this to an object. And here we pass 1 or more key value pairs. So here to access a nested property, we use the dot notation. So let's say we want to update the name of the author of a course. We pass author.name. We set this to John Smith. Okay. With this, we don't need to modify this object in memory and save it explicitly. We update it directly in the database. So back in the terminal, let's run this again. Okay, now let's check Compass. Refresh here. So here's our author object. And look, name is updated to John Smith. If you want to remove a subdocument, you use the onset operator. Let me show you how that works. So back in the code, here we use the onset operator. Now we can onset author.name to remove this nested property, or we can remove this author subdocument as a whole. So we need to set this to an empty string. Okay, now let's run this again. So node, okay, back in Compass, refresh, and look, we no longer have the author property. Now, as I told you before, these subdocuments are similar to normal documents. So here we can enforce validation. We can enforce that every course should have an author. So here's the definition of our course schema. If you want to make this author property required, here we need to pass a schema type object. So we set the type to author schema and then required to true. Exactly like what you have learned earlier in this section. Or if you want to make a specific property in this author subdocument required, you apply that validation on author subdocument itself. So here you pass a schema type object and set the required property to true. In the next lecture, I'm going to show you how to work with an array of subdocuments.